This presentation provides elaboration on the concepts of Common Pool Resources, or CPR, and their relevance to Agile Adaptive Governance in the Civil Nexus platform. It discusses networks of CPRs, the Civil Nexus knowledge base of CPRs, complications of transboundary and contended CPRs, and CPR governance design principles. Civil Nexus is a platform for individuals and teams working on appropriate civil society responses to polycrisis. It promotes capabilities for autonomy and self-reliance of polycrisis response initiatives within a supportive, like-minded community of civil society organisations. It provides tools for people to act, not just out of fear of our uncertain common future, but for concern at what we have lost and hope that we might ease the coming societal transitions. You're looking at a configured version of the Sparks Enterprise Architect, Sparks EA, GUI interface for desktop and internet collaboration. Sparks EA maintains a linked and consistent database reflecting concise and precise diagrams of elements and linkages for model-based systems engineering, MBSE. Sparks EA is a comprehensive tool for iterative consultation, capability building, planning, development, delivery, operation, and review of systems and initiatives. Integrating capability building presentations material directly into the Civil Nexus GUI and platform minimises presentation work duplication. Materials in this presentation from public reports are published under the Creative Commons licensing terms of those reports. Model-derived diagrams and underlying model are copyright Civil Nexus. In the fields of socio-eco-technological systems, or SETS, and adaptive governance, a common pool resource, CPR, is a resource with legitimate non-owner stakeholders. Stakeholders have legitimate interests if the people and nature they represent are impacted by or dependent on the resource for health, well-being, or livelihood. Consistent with principles of individual and innate dignity, rights of nature, and rights of self-determination, stakeholders have legitimate agency to co-manage the resource for common benefit. CPRs can be ecological, geophysical, social, and technological, because individuals, organisations, and nature can be impacted by or dependent on systems in all these domains. With our more expansive and systemic modern understanding of abstractions and linkages between networks of resources, we can start to model the complex structures and dynamics of interdependency. The precautionary principle emphasises pausing and review before leaping into new interventions with poorly understood consequences. The preeminence of property rights has impeded application of the precautionary principle to complex networks of CPRs. The ongoing global crisis of mismanagement and irreversible destruction of CPRs is the result. Consider the Lane Cove National Park as a CPR. It is a public access terrestrial protected area with IUCN classification 2, National Park. Interventions in governance of the park have impacts on other CPR which function in systems inside and outside the park. These linked CPR have their own stakeholders and resource networks. Some interlinked CPR in the Lane Cove National Park include IBRA and IMPRA geophysical locations, threatened species, capital equipment and funding resources for polycrisis adaptation and mitigation initiatives, threatened ecological communities, invasive species, and pollution sources and sink. We look at the Lane Cove National Park. We have a description of the park and its features. We have some discussions on mechanisms for interventions in the park, and we can see there are linkages to plan of management for the Lane Cove National Park and also traceability towards aggregation groups with subordinate CPRs. The Civil Nexus knowledge base holds model elements representing common pool resources based on institutional data sources and knowledge elicited from civil society stakeholders. Databases funded or maintained by institutions have variable completeness, currency, and reliability. Some of the institutions motivated to build and maintain resource databases have incentives to assert exclusive ownership and control of resource pool access, usage, stewardship, and destruction. The institutions sometimes assert that they are not constrained by the impacts of their choices on others, or by the mechanisms of transparency and public accountability. Western-influenced global jurisprudence has been inconsistent in recognising and remedying adverse public good impacts of poor CPR stewardship. Legal concepts of human rights, stakeholder rights, and rights of nature have been established by precedent and legislation. These can be overridden when jurists assert the precedence of principles of exclusive domain, property rights, and contract enforcement. Ungoverned and transboundary common pool resources are resources with contended or overlapping governance or governance gaps. Hierarchical governance structures such as federal, state, and local government departments often lead to overlaps. Compartmentalised organisations lead to governance gaps. The channels and carriers of interactions between the CPRs are complex. A significant objective for Civil Nexus is to identify, describe, analyse, link, and model important common pool resources which are not currently well managed. Reliable information and analysis can assist stakeholders to better co-govern a wide variety of CPRs. A topographic map with selected stacked layers from a geographic information system, or GIS, can highlight aspects of polycentric governance across geographic boundaries. Overlapping and multi-level governance regimes apply to common pool resources. Within each governance boundary and level, federal, state, local, civil society, and private, multiple stakeholder groups dispute and negotiate rights and responsibilities. Now consider that governance boundaries, stakeholders, governance levels, and resource characteristics might also vary over time and across multiple, complex, interacting systems of CPRs. Adaptive co-development of governance by polycentric networks of competent and heterogeneous stakeholders is essential to reforming failed governance models. Visualizing a map can help us think in detail about examples of CPR, including bioregions of savannas, forests, mountains, rocky areas, escarpments, lakes, rivers, wetlands, marine coral reefs, seagrass meadows, and kelp forests, native flora and fauna, invasive species, livestock, crops, hunting and fishing resources, pollution, terrestrial, marine and atmospheric, drainage basins, soils, geological and mineralogical resources, airspace, subsurface and deep underground, protected land uses, including indigenous, terrestrial and marine protected areas, parklands, sports fields and stadiums, conventional land use, including mining, grazing, cropping, intensive livestock, intensive horticulture, civic and governmental, industrial, commercial and residential, roads and rail networks, ports, logistics centres and shipping, public transport, energy generation and distribution, water supply and sewage, telecommunications, disaster management, social welfare, public health, education, finance, taxation, corporate governance, law enforcement, justice administration, and defence. Nobel laureate Elinor Ostrom identified 8 design principles of stable local CPR management. Ostrom's original 8 principles have since been slightly modified and expanded to include a number of additional variables believed to affect the success of self-organised governance systems, including effective communication, internal trust and reciprocity, and the nature of the resource system as a whole. Civil Nexus can provide a knowledge base for iterative and collaborative elaboration of measurements, assessments, and decisions reviews to enact the principles for significant CPRs. Principle 1 is clearly define the group boundaries and effective exclusion of external unentitled parties and the contents of the common pool resource. Principle 2 is appropriate and provision common resources that are adapted to local conditions. Principle 3 is enact collective choice arrangements that allow most resource appropriators to participate in the decision-making process. Principle 4 is to enact effective monitoring by monitors who are part of or accountable to the appropriators. Principle 5 is to implement a set scale of graduated sanctions for resource appropriators who violate community rules. Principle 6 is to implement mechanisms of conflict resolution that are cheap and easy access. Principle 7 is negotiate self-determination of the community recognised by higher level authorities. Principle 8, structure organisations in the form of multiple layers of nested enterprises with small CPRs at the base level. Additional Principle 1, implement dialogue and feedback mechanisms to promote effective communications, internal trust and reciprocity. Additional Principle 2, implement research and design programs to understand and manage complex social, ecological, technical systems, which are the content and context of the CPR. If you found the presentation interesting and enjoyable, comment and like the presentation and subscribe to the channel. We appreciate constructive comments and suggestions. What are we doing right? What should we do better or more? What should we change or do less? You'll find new presentations in different aspects of the Civil Nexus platform as they are posted. If you're interested in exploring the Civil Nexus platform, contact us via the comments to request access to a personal use read-only copy of the repository that you can virus scan and browse on your desktop. You'll need to visit the Spark Systems website to download and install the free Spark Systems EA Reader to access the models. If you're interested in collaborating on the platform for initiatives to address polycrisis, contact us via the comments to request edit permissions and access. We're interested to make your polycrisis mitigation initiatives of civil society groups visible to others. We can facilitate video conferences to help you document and link your initiatives and stakeholders in the Civil Nexus platform. We can provide basic written advice on configuring software, system, and platform connections. The platform tools are mostly free and open source software, or FOSS, suitable for Windows and Linux computers. But the editing-enabled versions of Spark's Enterprise Architect are a commercial product with a range of pricing and capability options. Even if you're not interested in Civil Nexus, get involved with civil society organisations interested in big picture solutions to polycrisis mitigation and adaptation. Continue hoping that BAU multilateral coordination will provide adaptation for polycrisis. Multilateralism is opposed by autocrats, well-funded private industry groups, and their captured legislators, regulators, and jurists. Progress on achieving required outcomes needs to happen 5 times faster than current rates to avoid the deepest societal collapses.